All right, welcome to lesson 12, if I'm correct. Um, Today, we're going to continue from where we stop. We stop at chapter 4 uh, in our class 11. So, today, we're going to be talking about functions. Then, we talked about array and we talked about objects. And don't forget, we are in the JavaScript class, which is the language that you can use to add interaction to your page. We've already talked about how you can include JavaScript on a page. We talked about what is comment in JavaScript. We talked about what is case sensitivities in JavaScript. We talked about variables in JavaScript, and we talked about data type in JavaScript. And lastly, we talked about the operators and the control flows that we have in JavaScript. And we're able to talk about some of the control flows, like the if else. We talked about the switch, which is a common one you're going to be using. But that's not all. We have another one which is known as loop, which is one that you can always run again and again and again. But for now, we don't need it. So once we are done with our array and object, by the time we need the loop, I'm going to bring it here. But for today, we're going to be starting with functions. And when you're talking about functions, this is a way of you grouping your code together and reuse it in different places. So functions allows us to have group of code that can be reused in different places. So as you can see from the definition here, reusable block of code. So for example, you want to have a function that, or you want to be greeting people that are going to be coming to your site there. So you can always create a function. I mean, you define your code, but inside that your code, you can now call it again and again. You can think of a variable, but variable is not just for one value. It's grouping a lot of things, a lot of codes together as one, and anytime you need it, you call that name. But the way you call it here is quite different from the way you call normal variable. So the first thing you need to be able to do is to declare, just like you are creating your variable, because you need to let JavaScript know about it. You can't just bring anything anyhow like that. JavaScript needs to know about what is going on. And the first thing you should always do too, or what you're always going to be doing there, is to declare your function. And how do you declare a function? So in JavaScript, to declare a function, this is one way of doing it. So you start with this keyword function. So it must already, as you can see, the color. So any one of them that have this color here, depending on whatever the code editor you're using, so the color might not be like this. But we keyword, which is something I've explained to. I told you keyword are reserved identifier. They are special to your language. So which means anytime you use it, they have meaning. They have what to do. And one of them is this function here. Some of them is this switch, the case, the default. They have what break. They have what they are doing in JavaScript. Const, it have what is doing. You can't just use it anyhow. You have to use it where you are supposed to use it. The same thing if, let, we have this s and so forth like that. They are keyword in JavaScript, which means they have what they are doing. And for function, the keyword here is the same thing as function, which allows you to create your function. And the function you are creating there, you'll be giving it a name, just like your variable. They are giving it a name. Here too, the function, you need to give it a name, because they are going to call it later on when you need to reuse whatever you are going to be putting here. So whatever you are going to be putting here can be anything. Can be you are creating your variable, you are doing some stuff. It can be one line, two line, 1 billion line, depending on whatever you want this your function to carry out there like that. But you can always reuse it. Not that you have to keep typing the same code again and again and again anytime you need that functionality. So what you just do, you group all those functionality together inside this name, and anytime you need it, you are going to call it again through this name. For example, here now we have this function. So my function, the name of it is greet. And as you can see, the definition of a function, you are going to have the name followed by these two brackets. That's how it's going to know that this is a function, not variable. They're part of what you need to pass, because there's something you're going to be passing inside this bracket later on. But for now, this is how to create the simplest function they are going to be creating there. This is the pattern that it follows. So you have the keyword function followed by the name the name is coming from you, but it follow the rules that you name by your variable. It cannot have space. It cannot do all those other things that we've talked about. So, and as you can see, here I'm creating a function known as a greet, and what it's going to do, this is just the stuff it's going to do like that. So hello, like this. So welcome, welcome to JavaScript class, like that. That's just all. But this function now, we can always call it to perform this action again and again. Without the function, if you want to do it, so anytime you want to do it, what you just do is, as you can see, I'm calling the code again and again. And if I need to make changes now, I have to make changes in these 4 lines, depending on wherever you are calling this stuff. But this is bad practice, because some of the time, sometimes they're like that. Whatever you want to do, you can just think of this one as one group of code that you want to perform, because it might not be the same text, but you want to reuse these 4 items on a different line. You don't do it like this. What do? You create a function, and anywhere you need the function, you are going to call the function. Here now, we just create the function. JavaScript will not do anything with it yet. You are just telling JavaScript that, okay, this function, this is what it's going to do. This is the name I'm going to be using to call it later on. So if I save here, go to the page, as you can see, nothing is happening because you've not called it. In order for it to work, you have to call it. The only thing you are just doing here is to let JavaScript to know that this your function is there, which is what we call function declaration. You are only declaring it, you are not telling JavaScript to use it. So in order for JavaScript to use it, you have to call your function. And to call function is just by calling the name of it, followed by the 2 brackets. If you do it like this, you are not calling it. So in order for you to call function, you must always call the name the way you type it here, like that. So here now, save. So by the time this thing get to the page, JavaScript will see this line. Okay, you said you want to create this function. So by the time it's 192, okay, you are calling it. What it will do is that it will go back to this line and start doing whatever you have inside it. So which means here now, as you can see, it's telling us that this message is coming from line 189, even though we are calling it on line 192. What it does is, whatever enter you call it, it will always go back to where you define it, and it will start doing everything you have there. And the advantage here is that I can always call it multiple times. So if I want this thing to do the same thing again and again, so call it, you see that it's going to perform that action. And one day I can just come here, just and all of them, they are going to get updated automatically because they are depending on whatever you have in your definition. So when you call this, what you to do is that JavaScript will go to where you define, do whatever you want to do there. Then again, to see another one, go back up again, run whatever it needs to run inside that your function there like this. So this is one way of declaring your function. This is not the only way, but this is one of the oldest and still the way you declare your function, because when you need some stuff in JavaScript later on, when you're dealing with advanced stuff, you have to do it like this, not the other way that I want to show. Again, too, there's some places that the other way I want to show is what you're always going to use because it's kind of a short compared to this one here. If you use this one too, it will work, but most of the time, what you want to do is to use the short form of it there, and we have something known as a arrow function. So in JavaScript, we have something known as arrow function, and this is where the name is coming from because it had this kind of an arrow as part of the stuff. But when you're creating a function there like that, you create it as a value because arrow function doesn't have name. So this is that the arrow function is this entire stuff here. So entire stuff here is what we call arrow. So when you are talking about the arrow function, it's something like this. So this is a valid arrow function. But the problem with this is that it doesn't have name. So which means once you are done with it here, there's no way you can recall it later on. And that's the reason why we are assigning it to a variable. So that anytime, anything you put inside a variable, you can always call it back later on when you declare. So if you do let age to be 20 or whatever value. So which means anytime you call this age later on, it will give you the value that you have inside it like that. So the same thing too, you can assign this your arrow function into a name that you want to be using to call it later on there like that. So instead of us using this method, which is by using the function keyword followed by the name, then followed by the bracket, So this is how you can do it using arrow function. Because later on, most of the time, you only need that function, you don't need the name. And you are going to be seeing that when we get to that part, which is called the callback later on. But sometimes, or most of the time, you always want to assign that your function to a particular name so that you can recall it later on there. Because without the name, there's no way you can call it later on. And if you don't call it, JavaScript will not do anything. It will see that you define it, but as soon as you not call the stuff, nothing will happen with that function. So that same function now, we can recreate it by using the arrow function here like that. The same way you call it, the function calling is always the same. When you want to call it, it's always the same. Doesn't matter whether you are doing with arrow or you are dealing with normal way of creating functions. So save, and you see now that what we get is hello, and you can always call it multiple times like that. So if you want it to run 3 times, then you are going to call it 3 times, and on the page you see that it will perform the action that you have inside the function. This is not the only way you can do it too. You can always assign this your what we call function expression. So that your function too, you can always assign it as if you are creating a variable, because function in JavaScript, they are like value too, just that they are special type of value because they can carry out action there like that. So the same way you can deal with arrow, you can only do with function too. So which means here I can still create it in this way by just say const greet like this. Greet is going to be function. Then this one too, you don't need to give it name because the name here is useless. Since you are assigning it to another name, the name here is useless, but you can always put it name. So let me just put useless name like that because you've already assigned it to another thing. So you can do it in this way, you can do it in this way, but you won't be seeing me doing it by using function. The only time I will be assigning my function to a variable in this way is when I'm using arrow function, but you can always do it in this way. And most of the code, you will not even see it like this because this name is useless. What you only see in this pattern here. So you see the function followed by the name, then you have the bracket, and inside the curly brace, that's where you put whatever you want this your function to carry out for you there like that. We are going to be using all this in later on, and again too in our code or in JavaScript, that some of them that function, that some function that have been created for us already, and you have been using some of them. You know, yesterday we used this boolean, so this is a function here, but it's already in JavaScript, so you are not the one creating it. Your own is now to use it, but some of them you are going to be creating it yourself later on, and that's the reason why you need to know what is going on with functions there like that. But the two major way that you're going to be using is by using this method here, which is you having your function, the function then followed by the name like that, or you are going to be using arrow function. But if you look at it, all these functions, they have something in their own bracket, but my own did not have something. What is going on there is under what we call parameter and argument. The function we just create now, they are not that useful because it's just doing one thing at the same time like that. For like anytime you call it, it's still the same thing that is at. But to be nice, just like this boolean, you know, you can pass something here. So if I pass this one here now, just pass AB, you see that it's giving us true. But if I pass empty string, you see that the value is different. Even though you know the type of value is going to, but what it's doing is quite different. Whatever you are passing inside it. So this here is coming from what we call this parameter and argument. Both of them, you can actually revert to them as the same thing, but technically they are not the same. So when you are creating a function, your function can depend on value that is going to be passed in later on. For example, I want to have a function that is going to greet someone, but that greeting that we have here, you know, this one did not really care about who we are greeting. We are just saying hello. But it would be nice if I can call this in for different user. So hello Kayode, hello James, hello that, and so forth like that. So how do you tell your function that there is something that will be passing in later on? That's where parameter comes in. So whatever you are going to be passing later on to that your function is what we call parameter. So the time you are now passing it, like this one now, this is what we call argument. The actual value you are passing into it when you are calling the function, that's what we call argument. But when you are defining a function, you are telling it that this thing will be coming in later on. That thing you are using there is what we call parameter. But you know they are referring to the same because they are representing the same thing. So that's why you can always use them interchangeably, because some language they will call this one parameter and they will still call it the same thing. The one you are creating, when you are creating it, is parameter. When you are passing, is parameter. Some language, when you are creating, is argument. When you are passing, is argument. So, but there is a subtle difference between them when you are dealing with it. So how do you create a function that can receive parameter? So we have function with parameters like that. So it can be multiple. So now that our greeting, but before you get to that greeting, let me give you the structure. So this is the structure of any function, whether it is arrow or your normal function. So here now, as you can see, it's different from what we had before. There's nothing is inside the bracket, but now we have something inside bracket. So whatever you are going to be passing here, you'll be using in your code or whatever you are doing here. But later on, anybody that have to pass all these value there. So what you are doing here is that, okay, I want to do something based on all these values, but right now I don't have them. But I know that when the user is calling the function, they are going to pass it for me. So here we have this function which is known as greet. So anybody that is going to be calling the function, they are going to be giving us name. This name you are seeing here is coming from you, just like your variable. It's just that it is for function alone. You cannot use it outside of function. So what you are doing here, you can always call it x, you can call it y. It all depends on you. So again, you can call it your name. But wherever you want to use it in the function, you have to use that same name. So what you are doing here is that later on, when this function is being called, they are going to pass here. But right now, in my own function, I'm calling it your name so that I can use it anywhere I need it in this function. But when they are passing it, they can pass anything they want. It doesn't care. This one is just a way of representing the value that they are going to be passing later on. And this value here, you can call it anything. Just like you should always use a descriptive name so that when you call it to your code later on, you know what this thing is doing. It doesn't matter whether you call it X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and so forth like that. It will always work. This thing doesn't care. The name is for your own reading sake. But anywhere you need this stuff, this is the same thing you are going to call. So which means here, I need to use ABC. What's wrong with this AI? I need to use ABC, and as you can see, it will always work. So now when you want to call your function, you don't just call it like the way we normally call it before. So you have to pass the value that this will now be represented. So this ABC here is what we call parameter. Why this John here is what we call argument. So John is argument like that. The actual value you are passing is argument. Why here ABC is parameter. And you can receive multiple parameters depending on the number of parameters you have here. That's the number of value they have to pass later on. If they don't pass it, that it doesn't force it. It's not like Python. Assuming it's Python now, if you declare whatever you have, if you don't pass it, it will complain. It will not even go. It will tell you that you did not pass what you are supposed to pass. But in JavaScript, it doesn't care because we have a default value in JavaScript which is undefined. You know, when you create your variable and you don't give it value, it will be undefined by default. For example, here now, if I come here, just say let age like that, I did not put anything, and I just said console log age. So if you don't put any value by default, what you are going to get is just undefined. The same thing here too. If you are expecting something in your function and it is not passed, those ones that are not passed, they are going to be undefined by default. So which means I can still call this function without passing anything inside it there like that. So here I can just say great like this. So by the time it to get to the page, you see that it's not saying hello undefined, welcome to JavaScript, because what it does is that by the time JavaScript is there, it will go to your function. But you can see that the function is expecting something here, which we call ABC. So hello, then whatever you pass, then followed by welcome to JavaScript. But now if you check this John on and we save it, go to the page, you see the first one is saying hello, welcome to JavaScript. But because we did not pass it to the second one, what you get is undefined. Any value that is not set by default, what you get is undefined for that value. So which means the value is not defined at that point, even though it might be defined later on, but at that point it is not defined there like that. So and then we can always call this grid with different people. So you can see now that code, we don't need to be duplicating this code again and again. What we just need to do is to call the function, and anywhere we need it again, so call it here too, like that. So pass another name, James, like this. So again, kind of like this. Let me use this, and John, and so forth like that. So save. You see that all of them are going to run, but parameter, it will replace it with the value that the user is passing there. So anywhere that you want to be, like you want to make it dynamic in your function, you are going to receive it as a parameter. And when you are calling the function, you are going to pass in the parameter. Your parameter doesn't need to be one. It can be 1, 2, 3, and so forth like that, depending on the number of parameter your function wants. As you can see, you can have 1, you can have 2, you can have 3, you can have 20, all the way I think 32 or so like that you can pass there like that. I'm not sure, but it have limits that you can pass, but it's really much that you can always pass. For example, here now we have a function which is going to add, and what is it doing? So as you can see here, we don't care about the value. So here I'm calling A and B, but you know that's, you can call it number 1 and number 2 and so forth like that. So it doesn't care, but whatever you pass there, that's how you are going to be calling it like that. So console CLG, the sum, complete it for me. So when I don't need you, be doing nonsense. So A plus B, let me just use this. So save. So anytime we call this our add now, we can always call it with different number. So add, we have 120. You know, this one now is going to give us 21. Again, you can always call it. So this function, instead of us doing this thing again and again here, you see that it will use that function. But here now I'm doing simple stuff. But in a real sense, what you'll be doing here will be more than one line. It can get up to like 10 line, 20 line, 40 line. But those actions, when you call the function, it will always run them again and again. You don't create function for something of one line like this that you can. But if it's know that that thing too, it will be reused in different places, and it's something that can change, you can actually create a function for it like that. So you can always create a function, and that function you reuse it anytime you need it. But some of them have something known as a default value. So some of your parameter have default value. So which means sometimes when those, like this one now, so let me go back so to our function, then we have this greet once again. So we are receiving the name like that, but I don't want it to do all this in a string. I'm not using because of what I want to do right now. It will not allow me to do that. So now let's call the function again. So we are calling greet. But you know, if you pass empty stuff into this greet, what you are going to get is undefined. So what can you do with this value? So what if the user are not supposed to always pass the value? If they don't pass the value, you want to use alternative value. So in your code, you can always do it from here. As you can see what the AI did before. It's checking whether that is undefined. Then from there, it's writing another message. But what I just care about is the name. So you can always set a default. So this is what we call default value. So what this thing will do is that when you are not passing the value for this parameter, it will use this one. But if you pass it, it will skip whatever you use as default. So which means this one is fallback. It's not something it will use when user pass the value. So if I save this one now, there you see that the what is I'm using is default value. But if I pass something inside, so if I put something inside like this, it will skip that default value and it will use whatever the user pass. So there's some time some of the, as you can see here, we are creating a user, but we know that if you don't supply the row, we just default it to viewer. But if you supply the row that you want for admin, you see that it will create the user with the row admin. But by default, if you don't give us row, we just assume that the user is viewer. So anytime you want to create users, you can see it's creating this user, it's creating the user. But first one, it did not supply the value for row. No, we have two parameters here, the name and the row. So here is supplying the name, but it did not supply row. So what it will do is that it will use viewer as the row, since it's the default value. But since this one is giving the two value, so since the two value are there, then it will not be using this one again. It will use whatever you pass, like that. But there's something you need to know there. All your default values should always be last if you have multiple parameter. So if you have multiple parameter there, the one that is required should always come first, because you know the way you are passed, the way you have this thing here, that's the same way you have to pass the value. So here I have let's do A and B like this, not add. So let's do multiply like that, so that you can see, or let's do subtract. So this one will come the way you pass the value here, that's the same way they are going to be passed in your, the way you pass the value here, that's the same way they are going to be mapped here. So the first value will always go to A, the second value will always going to B. So if you want the 5 to be A, then you have to arrange it in that way. So which means here these two are not going to be the same thing. So if I use 5, 10, they are not going to give us the same value, because A is 5 while B is 10. But here A is 10 while B is 5. And that's the reason why when you have default value, they are always going to be last. Those default, those one that require should come first, because the way you pass them, the way is going to send it into that your function there like that. So save, you see that the first one is giving us -5, while the second one is giving us 5, because this thing doesn't change. It doesn't change the order. The way you define them here, that is same order you have to be passing the value. So if the name is coming first, the name is what you have to pass first. If the name is last, the name is what you are going to pass last. That one if you have multiple parameters. If it's just one, you know, you don't need all these things that I'm explaining. But it's not always like that, that your function will always be one parameter. Most of the time it will be multiple parameter. And the way you arrange it when you are creating your function, that's the same way you are going to pass. As you can see here, the first parameter is name, the second one is row. The same thing when you are passing it, the value that you are passing must always be for name, and the second one must always be for row. Not that you change them like that. So there's a lot you can do with your function, but I will not explore this one for now, because we don't really need it like that. But one last part, that one is going to come in there like that. But if you look at my function, after creating them, I'm just performing the action directly inside the function. There are some functions that are all function by default. Once they are done, they used to return back a value to where it's calling. Now this is the line we are calling it. So anywhere you are calling a function, they used to return back a value. Every function must return a value. If you specify it, it will return all defined by default. But if you want to return a value from there like that, you basically a function that is going to return a value. So instead of you just doing console like perform the action here, so what we can just do is just the result like this is going to be A times B. And what do we do? You can use what we call return keyword. So this is another keyword. What it does is that in your function, when you use it matter, in your function or anywhere you use it, what it will do is that whatever you pass in front of it, it will return it back to whoever is calling this function. You know you are going to be calling your function later on. For example, here now I have const results or RE like that, and what am I doing? I'm calling this multiply. As you can see, we are calling this one. So what it does, what this one will do is that it will go to the definition. So what is definition? What you are doing there, you are adding or you are multiplying these two numbers together. Then when it's done, is returning result. So what this will do is that by the time you return the result, you know the value is 5. So that means 5 is going to A, 10 is going to B. So which means the calculation here is going to be 5. So it's going to be 5 multiplied by 10. So which means it's going to be 50. So this line, the return here, what it will now say is return 50. So since it return 50, everything here will now turn to 50. So that 50 will now be, so this is what we call return. Whatever you return for your function, when the function is done, that's what it's going to return to whoever calling it. And who is calling it, as you can see, is this RE that is calling it. It doesn't matter, you don't even need to assign it to anything. Anywhere you call that function, if it is value, it will return that value back to you. But that doesn't mean you cannot do any, as you can see, you can perform different operations. For example, you can firstly log out the result or do something, or you can say done, like that. The answer is do whatever you want to do with it. So the answer is going to be result. Then when it's done, it's now returning it back to who call that function. And when is the function being called? So it's always good that you put it somewhere, because you don't put the result. Once JavaScript leave that line, that's the end of that result. And that's the reason why you see that I'm saving it inside this RE. Because once you call a function and it's done with its work, that's the end of that function. So once it's past this line, that's the end. But if you need that, that means you have to save it somewhere in your variable talk about. You know, when you need a value, you put it somewhere. And in order for you to save a value, you put it in so that I can call it later. And where do I want to call it? I want to call it inside after this line. And once I save it, go to the page. Then when it's done, then it transfers the result to this RE. Then RE2 is now printing out the result on line 272. So you can continue using the value. And again, it doesn't need to even do it in this way. This is just long journey. You can just do your console log directly by just saying mod like this. Then don't forget, whatever you pass inside this console log, it's what is going to print out. It's not going to print out this small. What it's to do is that it will perform this action here first, but once it's done, no, this one will return a value. That value is returning is what this one will see, and that's what it will output. That's what you are going to be doing, putting one code inside another code. Like you kind of do a combination that you combine it together to achieve what you are trying to do. So what it will happen is that, you know, in mathematics, you clear the bracket first. What is inside will be clear first. So it will clear this, get the result. Then when it's done with the result, that's what that one will say. And once you say it there like that, that's what is going to output. As you can see, the function will run first because we have this done. The answer is like that. So the answer is going to be this. So whatever you are doing here is going to run them. Then when it's done, it will return. But there's something you need to know about this return. You cannot use you can use multiple return, but it has to be based on condition, because all of them cannot be seen at once. Anything after return will not be done. Anything after return will not be done. So anything here is not reachable. That's the problem with this so anything here is not reachable. Once it reaches return, what it will do there is that the result you are returning, it will go back to the caller. And who is the caller? Wherever you are calling that function, that is the caller. So this one is the log that is calling it, but it doesn't matter. It can be on this line like that. So this line is one calling it. Here, this is the log that is calling it. So whenever you are calling it, once it's returned, it will stop on this line and it will go back to wherever it is being called like that. So which means anything after return, it doesn't see it. So even VS Code will even show it for you there like that if you put anything here. For example, if I just say console like this, so like this, depending on, it's supposed to give me, I think I don't have the extension here, but normally it will show it, like it will grade this one out that you are not even going to reach here like that. So but right now this will never be called. So if you save it, go to the page, you will never see it. That console log, you never see it, because JavaScript is not getting to that part. As you can see, this is the first one. The only thing we are seeing is done. The result is 100. For the second one, done, the result is 200. But it's not getting here, because after return, nothing is. This is where it will stop. Once you use return, it will just return whatever you have in front of it and go back. And if you don't put anything in front of it, you return. This is what JavaScript is doing behind the scene automatically. There like that. So if you don't put anything in front of return, what you are returning is nothing. So which means undefined. Anytime you don't put a return there, as you can see, what it will return is undefined. So if you just have only return without value, or if you want to return a particular value, just put it. Anything you put in front of it, that's what it returns. It doesn't care. So as you can see, for all of them, it will always return 3, because that's what I'm returning. Even though it's not making sense, what I want to return is the result of the calculation. So whatever you return here, that's the caller. Whatever you return here is what the caller will get. So that's what it's going to get here, and that's what it's going to get on this line where you are calling your function, because all these things are very important. When we started using them, it will not look as if something is wrong. Nothing is wrong because of all this thing. Anything you put after return, it will never get to the screen. There, and you can see it's not warning us. There is no, because this is still valid. But the problem is that anything after return will never get wrong, because this is where JavaScript will stop inside this function. When anytime you use return, it means you are stopping on this line, go back to wherever it's coming from before. You know that where is it coming from? We call it on this line before it jump here. So from there, it did this line, perform this line. Now after seeing result, the return there, you return what you put in front of it, then like that. So, and it goes back to where it's being called, like that. So that's how this thing works. Because by the time we started using it, it will not look as if something is not working, or why am I not seeing this text here, or why am I not seeing this action, or why is this not performing this. Anything after return, it will never see that one if they are not part, if the return is not part of the condition. But you can actually condition it there like that. For example, we have a function check eligibility, like that. So check eligibility, we have the age, as you can see here. So this one is condition, which is something that we've talked about, something that we talked about yesterday, there like that. So if you look at it, we have the check eligibility. So based on the age, you either get this return or this return, but not the two of them. No, don't forget, when you're using if else, only one of them is, so it will either see this one or this one. So which means down here now, we can just create this one, as you can see. So for the first eligibility, it will print out the result, and once you save it, you see that you are eligible to vote because of what we pass there. But now, if you do it for result 2, because this one to save, you see that the return of that one is this one, because you can't see the two of them. But if that condition is not there, only the first one, only the first return it can find, that's only one it works. So if I move all this in up, all this if here will not work at all. Even if you are doing something there, you will never see them, because the return is not even since already have return. Yeah, let me just put yes, like that. Let me put no, yeah. So for this one now, you will never say anything like yes or no. You will not even see this one. The only thing you always say is you are eligible to vote, because that's the first return it can find. Once you see return, it will stop on that line. The first return it can find, that's where it will stop. So which means the two code, as you can see, they will return you are eligible, even though it is not. So that means you have a big error in your code, because you don't know how return works. So like that, you have to do it properly. If you don't do it properly, then it doesn't show the way it's supposed to, like that. Yeah, so that's about function. We don't want to spend too much time on it, because we're still going to be talking about them when we get to where it is going to be used a lot there. But these are the stuff you need to understand, the basic stuff you need to understand about function before we start putting them into use. So for this first class function and callback, so let me just explain simple stuff about it. In JavaScript, there like that, we have a parameter where you can pass value as where you can pass a parameter to your function. And all the parameters I've been using since, they are just simple value like 10, 5, or string, the name, whatever stuff. Function too can be passed as parameter to another function. Function can be passed as parameter to another function, because there's some function that they want to carry out some action, but they don't really know how to get the actual value they want to use. From this our age here now, we know that they are simple stuff, but just pass the value you want and it will work on based on that. But what if you have some complex data? For example, you have the name there, you have the age, you have the class, you have the score, but the only thing I want to extract out of that data is just your age. So how is this function going to know how to extract the data? So that function now can now expect a function that can do that extraction for it. So your own is not to pass the function for it, and it will extract what it needs to extract there. But you are going to be seeing this in action when we get to array, how to do what I just explained and the application of it. But the basic stuff here is that you can pass function as parameter for another function. And any function you are passing as parameter to another function, we call that function call back. It just like, later on that function will be called inside. You are not the one calling it, it will be called inside the function. So for example, here now we have function greet, and here we have this in this way, and you have this like that. But this is just the stuff. So you have the function, you have the function name, then inside this place as this in what you pass is a call back. So instead of you passing simple parameter, what you'll be passing here is another function. And look at the sample here, just simple stuff before we get to array. You see it more use of it in array. You use it in a lot in array because array have all those functions. It knows that it needs to process the data, but the data you have inside your array can be different value. So how is it going to know which one to pick from that value? You are going to be using callback to work with this. For example, here we have a function known as greet, and the job of it is just to receive a name and it's going to do whatever you want to do. Now imagine we have another function that process user input. So you can think of this one, maybe it's coming from what the user type in the box. Like you have a box on the page and they type their name there. So this function now you call it, but there is a problem. The problem is that this function should be able to, it should be flexible in a way that the way it is going to grade the user is depending on the whatever you pass here to use as the grading function. Not that the function is always like this. For example, I can just create a function, so function grade 2 like this. So what this one will do, the name like that. The first one is doing hello, the second one is doing hi. So this process here should be able to receive any way you want to create the user. But the function doesn't need to even know how you are doing it. Its own job is that give me the function you want to use to create, and anywhere I need to create, I will now call that function added. And that's what. So here now, as you can see, this process user is not collecting value. It's not collecting the message you want to agree. What is collecting is the function that you want to use to grade. So that anytime you want to call this your function, what you just do is pass the function that you want to use there like that. And once this function is passed there like that, and when you save it, go to the page, and as you can see, what it's doing is hello John. But now replace this one with grade 2, save it, you see that it's still working, but now the message is totally different. So this function doesn't need to know how you are doing the greeting. Its own job is just that receive the function you want to call, because that thing needs to happen later on. That's why it is function. It's not just any value. Because if it is just normal value, it means you have to pass everything here when you are defining the function or when you are calling. But most of the time, you want to process the data first. If you can see that the data is coming from here, not from where. Can you see that not from where we are calling the greet is not being called by you. Greet is being called by another function. You see, when this one gets its own value, then when it's done, it will now call this one too. You can call it anything. It doesn't need to be called back, but we normally name it callback. So here you can just call it F. But when time you want to call it, you pass. As you can see, I'll be receiving a function later on, call F. So by the time I receive it, then I'm calling it on this line. After I already received my name, you can see the name is not changing. So whether it is the first one you are calling or the second one, this is the one that is determining the name. But again too, you can receive the name too as parameter. For example here, don't forget you can receive multiple parameters. So which means here, for John, we want to use grade 2 like that, and for another name we want to use grade 1. No, this is what I want. So when we are greeting John, we are using grade 1 to greet John. Then when it is for Jane, we are using grade 2. So now once you save it, even though it's the same function we are calling, but since the function that we are expecting, you are passing there, but they must have the same signature. You can see they have the same signature. They are expecting name, but you can call it anything you want. And by the time you get to the screen, I have error like that. So where is it? Yeah, because I've already defined the name here, so I don't need this one again. What I just want to do is so let's just say processing user input, then save like that, and then get to the screen, load. What's going on? What's wrong with this AI? It did not complete that. It showed that it is complete, but it did not complete because the AI is still telling me to accept first. That's why it's not saying it. Now, yeah, so you can see. So the first one is saying hello John, but the second one is saying hi Jane. So why is because we separate how the greeting is worked. So this function now is responsible for one thing. What is responsible for is just how the stuff is going to be called. The name you want to call and how you want to call it, that's its own responsibility. So how it's going to be, what the way it's going to be called it, then you have to be the one that will supply it there. This is just simple stuff like that, but you are going to see more of it by the time we get to the array part, because array come with a lot of this kind of function. So what is there is that some of them you can help you to look whether a particular value is there or not, but how is it going to know the value you are looking for? So you give it the function that will look for the value there, and if the function return true, he knows that that's the value you are looking for. But if the function return false, he knows that that's not the value you are looking for. So the processing is, so this processing part, so whatever this function is doing, it's all about what it wants to do there like that. So let me just get there. This is just simple. What you just need to know from now is that you can pass function to as argument when you are calling. As you can say, here is a function. The one we are passing here to is a function. But here this is a simple value, which is string. This is string. But anytime you pass a function, that means the function will be used by the one that is calling it, not you. As you can see, we did not put bracket here. When you are calling callback, you don't put, once you do it like this, it means you've already called it yourself. So what this one will get is a result of greet, not the greet itself. So when you are passing it like this, it means you are getting the greet. It's not yet been called like that. All right, so we're going to get more understanding on this thing. What you just need to know for now here is that we have a function, and that function can be used as argument of another function. And here, sample, we have function greet, we have greet2, we have process user input. So this process user input is not just collecting any simple parameter, it's collecting function too. But I'm the one that name it f, but you can always call it anything you want. But in JavaScript, we call them callback. So any function, so this greet here, the way you are passing it here now is a callback to this process user input. So greet2 too is a callback to this process user input. But these are just normal argument. This is John, this is Jane. Normal. So when you are now passing function to another function as parameter or argument, that's when we call that one that you are passing callback. It's just a way of you to remember the function you are talking. When you just say function, you don't really know whether it's standing alone or you are passing it. But when you mention callback, everybody already know that it's function you are passing to another function. So it's just a naming stuff. It's not that you are creating it separate way. What is there is that you pass that function as argument to another function, and this function you are passing is what we call back like that. And you are going to be seeing it a lot once we get to array. And what is array? What is array? What is array? What is array? Because time is fast spent. So what is array? So when you are talking about array allows us to have multiple value in a single variable. Array allows us to have multiple value in a single variable, because when you go to your page later on, you are going to be seeing that some of these elements, they are the same. For example, now if I go back to the top of the page, as you can see, this one is the same thing as this one, is the same thing as this one, is the same thing as this one. The difference is just the data that is inside. So I can bundle all of them together inside a single name. What will just be different from it, the data there, is now the actual value. So you have the one, you have what is JavaScript, we have what is variable, and so forth like that. So I can't be creating how many topics we have here. We have, as you can see, we have 20 topics. Am I not going to create 20 variables to hold all of them? No, it doesn't make sense. We have a better way of handling. So when you have multiple values that looks alike or that goes together, you don't create different variable for all of them. You bundle them together in a single variable. And one way of doing that is by using array. The other way, the complex way of doing that, is by using object. But the simplest way is just array that we have here. As you can see, array is just other collection of what? Data. You have collection of data. They collocate together in a single name. For example, here we have colors. So instead of me creating variable for red, green, and blue, we just put all of them inside a variable known as colors. But that colors variable now is now holding red, is holding green, and is holding blue at the same time. And this is what we call array here. But you need to be able to create array. So you need to be able to create array. So you need to be able to create array. So in order for you to create array, so create array. So how do you create array in JavaScript? So in order for you to create array, we have two simple ways, or you can create array in different ways, but these are the two major ways of creating array. So you are going to be creating array, and when you are creating array, always use const, because you are not really changing the value. What you are going to be changing is what is inside the array, not the entire array. But if you know that you want to change the entire array, then you use let. But by convention, you always see const being used because you don't want the array to change. What you are changing is the value inside array. So you are going to have your variable name. Then we have this square bracket. So this square bracket is how we create array. And inside it, you are going to have value 1, value 2. Each one of them separated by. So value 1, value 2, value 3, and so forth like that. Depending on, you can have thousands of values inside it. There like that. So for example, we have const age, or let's just say scores like this. So inside the scores, we have this value. So const names, this single variable is holding John, Jane, Doe, and Smith like this. So to create a variable, this is to create array. This is one way of doing it. There's another way of creating array, but you don't really need it for now because it's just too long. So you can always do your array in this way by using the objects. But since we've not talked about object or class, it's not useful right now like that. So we have a new array like this, and inside this, as you can see, what I just typed now, this is. So in order for you to understand what I just did here now, you need to have knowledge of something around that 15 or so forth like that. But we are still in chapter 6, so we don't need to be doing it in this way. Like you can see, you can do it in this way, it will work too. But I will not be using this way because this one is cheap. It's just small thing you are typing, just start passing the value inside it. But array is crazy. They're like that. It's not like the other language that they have to be of the same type. It can be mixed. So in JavaScript, it can be mixed values. So it doesn't need to be of the same value. As you can see here, you can always pass the same, can pass multiple stuff inside like that. Let me views. This is supposed to be word wrap because it's supposed to go to next line. I don't want to be scrolling left and right to see this thing. So once you wrap it, so anything that is going beyond your screen, it will go to next line because it's depending on the screen you have left. So if so you can see, so let's go to next line based on the available space like that. So as you can see, it can hold number, it can hold string, it can hold boolean, it can hold null, it can hold undefined, it can even hold object. One subject, you know about this, and again too, it can even hold array, and that's where it comes. That's why it is complex type, because you can use it to hold other types of value together depending on what you are trying to do on the page like that. So this is array, but this is not just about array. Just creating it like this, you just create the array. But how do you use it? You know, when you create your normal variable, for example, we have const age to be 1. Then you know, in order for you to use the value, it's just by you calling the name of the value. So if you call age, if you just say print out age like this, or you do something like this, age plus 1. You know, here now you receive the value of age, then you add 1. You know that you are changing 1, you use the value at that point. So by the time we console log this one out, it will print 1 for the first one, like yeah. So it will not work because all these ones, they are not valid. You know, this is just a way of telling you something is going on there. So it will complain about all this because they are not well defined. It's just a structure telling you how things will look like. Let me comment out all this one too, like that. I will do some of them down. So save, come back to the page, and as you can see, it gives us 1, and for the second one that we are using the value, it gives us 2 like that. The same thing too can be done with array, but in a subtle way. So we have accessing array values. Because the way you access array value is different from the way you are accessing normal variable. Now, when you are dealing with normal variable, what you do there is just call the name of the variable. But here, if you call the name of array, for example, like this course now, if I call it like this and save and go to the page, you see that it's giving us all of them. It's not just giving us one item because you know it's holding multiple value. But how do we get this value out of it? How do we get 90 out of? How do we access 70? How do we access this 60? How do we access this 90? So in array, we use something known as index. So in array, we have index. So in array, we have index, or in programming in general. And when you're talking about index, what that means is that counting, so counting starts from 0, like that. So that's what we call index. Now we have position. So again, you have position like that. So you have position, but we are not. You don't use position with array. No, position. This is what you are used to. So when you are dealing with position, you are counting from 1. So 1, 2, 3. The first person, the second person, the first value, the third value, and so forth like that. But when you are dealing with array, when you are dealing with array, we don't count from 1, we count from 0. So which means the first item here, this is going to be index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, and so forth like that. This is position 1, but we don't count like that in array or in programming in general. When you need to access something inside collection, we use index. So this is going to be index 0. For you to get to 90, you are going to use index 0. For you to get to 80, you are going to use index 1. Once you know the position, just remove 1. But we don't think in position. Always think in index. So this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and so forth like that, depending on the number of value you have there like that. And if you want to access any one of the value, what you are going to do is to use your array name followed by the square bracket, and you have this index. So this one will give you the value at index. So this is how it works. When you want to get any value out of your array, so you are looking for. So if you want to access this 80 now, we need to put the square bracket there like that, and we pass 1 like this, because you know this is 0 and this is 1. So what this one will do is that it will go inside this your array, then give you the value at index 1. And once you save this one now, it will not be giving us everything again. It will now give us the value at that index. So if I want to access 60 now, you know this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, like that. So I will just pass 3 here like this. So go to the page, you see that we are getting 60. If you want to change the value too, that's the same thing you are going to do. So change array value like this. So to change it, you see the same thing you are going to do. So you are going to do array name, index, then you set it to a new value. No way you are doing with normal variable. What you do is variable, then you set it to value. This is for normal, when you are dealing with normal value. But you know, for the array, it's not holding a single value, it's holding multiple values. So what you do is that pass the index of the value and you set it to another value. So now if you want to change this 90 now, maybe this is a mistake, it's supposed to be 95. So what we are going to do here is going to be score. So what is the index of that 90? It is 0. Then we are changing it to what? We are changing it to 95. So from there now, we can now console log out. This thing is which. So you can now console log out scores like that. So save it. The value, only that value is now changed to 95 like that. Yes, you can do it and come here, but you know, in your code, what depending on what I'll be doing here, there's no way you know ahead of. You know what they want to do, but you don't know the time they are going to do it. You know this, the action you want to do on this button, when they click, you want to add it to the cart. You know that that's what they are going to do, but you don't know the time the user is going to click on that card. So there's something like you are going back to your code. You know the thing will be running here. Not that it will be the reason that I'm doing something like this is because you are learning right now. So you can always go back to the code and modify. But once the code is running already, there's nothing like you are going back to go and change the code. It's already running on the user browser. There's no way you go to their browser and start changing something. So you do it down in a way that this thing will happen later on. So what is happening here is that so what it is, imagine this using whatever they pick here. For example, you know your cart now, you can add this item multiple times to your cart. On some page, you are going to see that they have the quantity where you can increase the stuff. So you know that they are going to increase, but the time they are going to increase it is what you don't know. So you create the code down like this. So once the user increases it on the page, get the value, then change what you need to change from that your array. But how are you going to be doing that? That's why we need to talk about all this one first before now get to the DOM. Because you get the value, you already know that they are going to change. But what are they changing it to? When are they going to change it? That's what you don't know. So you create the code and that is going to undo everything. So you know that you'll be going back into the code. Oh, because it's 95, you will now come back here like that. Change it. It will work when you are doing it yourself. But whatever you are doing here is not for you. It's not for your system. It is going to be used somewhere else. So there's no way you'll be going back there to go and be tweaking the code. So if there's anything wrong, you have to do it here, then update the stuff. That's why we tell you go and update your app, because there's no way they will be, whatever they do there, they have to update it at your end, and they're not going to be there with you there like that. This one is just we are dealing with training. That's why you can always go back and modify, but in real world it will not be like that. And that's why you have to do things in this way, because you get the data from the back end, but the user update it at the front end. So what do? You change the value. And for example, you create the elements, like mean that all these tools or all the web app that they use to manage students or the mark student. You know, the lecturer, after submitting the stuff, the admin returning back that he needs to update the value. He submit 90. But you know the system already recorded 90, but they need to update it. So what do? You take that value, then you replace it. Not that you start going back in your code. There's nothing like in your code say the value will not be there because the data is coming from the back end. You don't even have the code at all. You get the data from the back end, then from there you modify whatever you need to modify. Not that you be the one that will be typing like this. But in order for you to see what is going on, that's why I'm using all these dummy values. Because most of the value will not come from you, or most of the value will be dynamically there like that. So they are going to be coming from somewhere, but you should be able to still change it even though it's coming from somewhere like that. So the major thing you need to know about the array, you should be able to create array, and even if you are not the one that create the array, you should be able to change the value, and you should be able to access the value. So when you want to access the value, you are going to be using what? Index of the array to access your value there like that. So to create array, what you do is that you have your name, then you set it. Again, you can always have empty array and you add value to it later on. Please look at it. So you can always have empty array and you add this in. So const names is going to be this. So this is array, this is valid array. But right now it doesn't have any value. So how do you put value? JavaScript is crazy. So anytime you put anything like this, if that index is there, it's going to replace the value. But if that index is not there, what JavaScript will do is that it will create the value at that index. You know, here now there is no value, so there is no 0, there is no 1, there is no 2. So here now on this line, we're now putting value. They just say that. So here now, what we're saying is that at index 0, put John. At index 1, put Jane. At index 2, put Doe. Because but assuming the value is there, what you'll be saying is you are changing. But since the value is not there before, now you are putting the value at that index. So before this line, so if you console log out names like this, then after that, after all these changes, you console log out the names. So go back to the page there like that. As you can see, when we created the stuff which is on this line, after we console log it out, you can see it's giving us that empty array. But now after this line, we fill in these 3 items. So we print it again. As you can see, we now have John, Jane, and Doe inside like that. But JavaScript is crazy. Even though you should not do it like that. If I want, I can just put 10 here. It doesn't want. So what it will do is that it will create all empty. JavaScript is crazy. As you can see, it will create empty space until it gets, because it has to fit the number. You know, you said it is at index 10. So that means it needs to have index other one before it get to now. So you know this is 0 1, even though there's no data there. You can see what he's saying here is this, but it's telling me that there are 11 stuff. That's why I should not be doing that inside the steady item, but it's telling me that there are 11 there because I've already created those. In some other programming language they don't allow this. It will not even go, it will throw out error because they are trying to safeguard you from problem that can come to later on. You know your program later on now, this is telling you have 11. You are trying to access something, for example here now, all those one we did not define. Let's just look for it. So let's look for at index 4. You know this is 0, this is 1, so like that. So now let's do at index 4 like that. So let's pick it. Can you see what is that doing? Undefined, because they are empty, nothing is there. So that's what other language used to safeguard you against. But this is web, anything goes, you do anyhow you want, and the way you can do anyhow you want, that's how you see anything your face see here like that. But there is a way of safeguarding. That's why you have all those your if condition. You check if that thing is there first. If it is there, do this. If it is not there, then throw error or show to the user that what they are doing is not what they are supposed to do, and so forth like that. So that's why I see when you do some stuff on the program, they will warn you, they will bring notification out that no, don't do that here. No, this thing is not there. I cannot do what you're asking me to do. So your program should be robust. So which means there you shouldn't just do anything here, because if you do anything here in JavaScript, if it cannot find it, you throw error. And once you throw error, don't forget everything that follows that error, it will not do them. It will stop there. So which is going to cause problem in your program there like that. So this is how to create your array. But array come with some methods that you can use. What is method? I will need to talk about this thing first. I will need to talk about objects before you can be talking about method, because that's under. Forget to look at this word method. What is method? Method is just function too. So anytime you hear the word method, it's just function. But they are telling you that that function is coming somewhere. You know, just like the way we have callback. You know, it's a function to another function as parameter. Method is just a function that you find inside object. Any function that is defined inside object, they are called what? Method. Any function that is defined inside object, they are called method. But right now you don't even know what is object. So let me go to object first, because all this thing they are using something that is coming from object. Why? Because array itself too is object. It's just a special kind of object that is given to us by JavaScript. No, you can know the type of any value. So by using this type of, so once you pass anything in front of it, for example, I pass test, it will always give you the type of that value. So here, if I do type, so type of, and I put 5, as you can see, it's telling us that the type of this thing is number, which is not the same thing. You know, this one, as you can see, that's why I said this one is string, while this one is number. So again, if you want to know the type of array, just type it, type of, as you can see what he's saying. He said it is object, and that's the reason why this note here is using some stuff that is coming from object, because array is special. But how do you create your own object? So in order for you to create your own object, or the object in general, that's where object comes in. So object is a general term that you can use to model a real world entity. So you can use it for collection too. So you have collection like student now, but this one doesn't deal with position. You know, from your array you have index 0, and the way you arrange it, that's the same way you are going to take them. So which means if you want to access this Jane, so where are my names? So if you want to access this John, you always use index 0. If you want to access Jane, you always use index 1. But this thing doesn't work like that in real world. All these things should be able to move freely, not that they are constrained to a particular position there. So instead of you now using index to hold all this your value, you can now supply a key that you can use to represent your value. So instead of you now using 0, so you can now give this 0 a name. So anytime you call that name, it will give you the value, and that's where object comes in. So object allows you to define collection using key and value. So the key is what you are going to be using to access the value later on, and the value is what you are saving there. And how do you create object? So in array, when you are creating an array, so let me put this in here first. So we have objects. So when you want to create objects, so create objects. So to create objects, this is how to create objects. So this is how to create objects like that. They're like this. So let me put all this in here. So this is how to create objects. I did not ask you to be using all this. So let me use my sample here. No, this one is using something that I don't want to explain yet. They are just there for this thing. So this is how to create objects. You can see to create object or to let me create empty object. So cause variable name is going to be this. So this is how to create so this is what we call empty object. Just like empty array that you have square bracket. So create empty object, this is curly brace. So here, this is the name that you are using. You just a variable. Whatever you are creating, you need to be able to access it later on. So you need the name you are using. But when you are creating object in real sense, you are going to be giving it a key followed by colon, then followed. You know, in array, this is how you do it. In array, you just specify the value 1, 2. You have value 3. It goes more than that in the real object. What you do is that you are not, there's no index here. So since there is no index, you need to use something to access it later on, and that's where key comes in. So key here will be holding this value, key 2 will be holding the value, and so forth like that. So here, as you can see the sample, we have this object, and this object, you can see the name of the variable, we call it person. So now the key here is name, and the value is holding is what? John. So the key is 8. You can see that this one make it easier. When you're reading this one now, it's kind of a way of assigning a name to your value that you are saving it. So instead of using 0 to access the name, index 1 to access the age, and index 3 to access whether it's a student, directly from here, you already have to the value. So here, this is the key. The key is this. This is the value. So this is the pattern. You have the key, followed by the colon, then followed by because you want to be having multiple value there. So this is what we call property here. So entire stuff here together, so you have key value, entire stuff together is known as property. You know, for this person, this is one of the property of that person. So the property of it have name. Another property of a person is that it has age. Another property is that you have nose, and whatever you are using to describe that person, whatever you are using to describe that object, you are going to have property here. So entire stuff here on this line is property. This is another property. This is another property. But for each property, you have the key and you have the there. So for this object now, which is known as a person, then we have name there, we have age, we have a student. As you can see, your value can be any of those values we've talked about. That's why it is complex. They are known as complex type. So array and object, they are known as what? Compound or complex type, because it's combining all those your types to form another types that you define. So we are defining a person, and this person is going to have name, the age, is student, which is whether be true or false. Then they have hobbies, but you know hobbies now is not just a single value. They have array of hobbies, so they do reading, gaming, and codes, because it's multiple. You know, when you're doing a multiple value, that's array and they like that. But it's not just simple like that too. It can hold a nested object too. No address now. Address too. You have the street, you have the city, you have the country, you have the house number, and so forth like that. No, it's not just simple. There's some address that they are simple. You write everything as a string, but some of them, when you want to structure them properly, you separate all the necessary are there like that. So this is how to create object. But how do you access objects? So how do you access object properties? So here too, we have two ways of accessing property from objects like that. So we have this pattern, which is known as the dot notation. So we call this one dot notation, and we call this one array notation like that. We can see using the array method like no square bracket. But the one you always use most of the time is the dot So that's why you see all these dots, where all these dots are coming from. All these things that you're seeing. So person dot greet. What he's doing is that he's trying to access something that is inside. So when you want to access any of this property that is inside the object, you are going to call the object name, followed by the dot, then followed by the key of the value you are looking for. So if I want to access their age now, what I will just do is going to be person dot age. If I want to access their hobbies, what I'm going to use is person dot hobbies. So what you have there, the object, which is whatever name you are using. Since this one is person, that's why it is person here. If you call it x, then that means it's going to be x dot name. But you know you don't use random name, you use a descriptive name. But this thing doesn't care. Whatever name you use here, that's what you're going to be using in your code there like that. So yeah, for us to get the name, because if you just call it, just like array, you can call the name directly. But if you call the name directly, it doesn't give you one value, it will give you all the values. So if I use person here, save, go to the page, what you are going to get is all the value. As you can see, just like array, they don't give you one value. When you call them, you will get all of them. But now if you need any one of them, then you follow it by the dot. And as you can see, VS Code autocomplete, it's coming in. So if I want to access the hobby now, then follow by the hobbies. And now you see that it will only return all the hobbies for that person. If it is address that I want to access, you see that it will return address. But if you see now, address too is its object on its own too. So which is, if you want to go deeper, you continue using dots. So the more dots you use, the more the person is going to get that. So if I want to access country now, so what I will just do is person dot address, then dot country like this. So save, you see that it's only the country that is going to return. You can't just use dot anyhow. So if I put dot again here too, because this is a string, all the string too have some methods that I can use for them. But right now, if I just do something that is not there and save it, you see that what you get is undefined, because there you can't use nonsense on it like that. So again too, if I need the age, it will be person dot age, and now here we are going to get age. But it's not always possible that you'll be using dots like this. That's the reason why we have this second method. And why do we have that second method? Is because when you are creating your key, the key you can see all the key. So even though it looks like string, but there's no quotes around them. It's because when they are simple text, you don't need to put quotes there. But if it is not simple text like that, you cannot put something. Again, if it is number, here too, if I put one here is string, not number. The one you are seeing here is not going to say that number, it is string. Whatever you are using as a key, it has to be string. If you use any other thing that is not string, it will do the conversion automatically. So it will string. So now if you now come here and you do something and you now say person then dot one, as you can see what is happening. You know, this thing doesn't recognize me. It's saying number here. I see this one as one, as number. Here it is text. So how is this thing now going to work? You need to convert this thing to string. How you do convert it to string? As you can see, this array notation supports the code part. But you go more than that too. You have a dynamic key that you want to access. This is what you have to use. So how do you do it? So you need to convert it to this array notation. And how do you do that? So anytime you have illegal name, anytime you are using illegal name to create your key, you must always use this notation here. Like that. You can see now, it's already in a quote. It's not seeing it as number again. So by the time you save this one, it is string. It has already been converted to string automatically. And this thing is done behind the scene there like that. Again too, you cannot use space in between them. You can just say, you now say my name. This is wrong. So my name is here. No, you cannot do it, but it's still valid. So in order for it to be valid, you have to put it in a quote. So if it is not a valid name, just put it in a quote. So you know now it's seeing everything as one. not multiple. Again too, you can't just come here, who send, did I send you? Don't do it. So here you can't just come here and say person like this then dot my name. No, now it will be saying it, I can see it's in name separate from mine, so it will not work. So any of those illegal name you cannot use dot. You always use dot when they are simple key like this. Anytime they are simple key, it will work. But once it's not simple key, you cannot do it again. What you do is to use the array notation. If it's not simple key, you can still use array notation, but we normally use array notation for illegal or the dynamic distance. So now if you put this one, it will work the way, no, the dot is not supposed to be here. So it will work the way you are expecting it to work. We have there. But it's not a must that it have to be legal name that you can use it with. Even if it's something, so you can always say person, then name like this, it will work. But this is waste of typing here, because you can actually do person dot name, because it's kind of as simple as typing person dot name compared to this one like this, because it's simpler, but it will still work. So you can use any method. Another reason why you'll be using this is when you have a variable that is holding the key. When you have, that's dynamic, because it can change. So for example, now I have a name and I have the user key like this. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for name. So here you can just come here and now do something like this and do person dot user key. And you do dot, what it will do is that whatever value you type, it will go to that object and it will look for it there. But it's nothing like user key. What we are doing here is that it's supposed to take this variable with the value that is holding, then replace it here. So if you do it like this and go to the page, you see that it will be undefined, because there is nothing like user key. So we want it to translate this one, translate it here as a variable, not as normal key that is inside of there. So in order for that one to work, what you do is to put it inside display. But look at it, as you can see, this one is not having quotes because you need to translate it. But if you put it inside the quote, it will be doing what you were doing before. Once you put it inside the quote, it means go to that place and look for that value there. But if you don't put it inside quote, it means this is a variable. Go and look for that variable. Whatever that variable is holding, that's what you need to use. So now if I save it and go to the page, what is holding is name. So that name is what is now, it will give you. So now I can always change this one. So if I change it to age like this, so save, you see now it will, because the value has changed, so that's what it will be looking for. Because that's how this thing will work later on. Because no, don't forget, the data will be coming from the back end. So you don't really have the data down. You don't really have all this key. Or sometimes the user will be the one that will tell you what you need to access. So once you receive it from the user, you need to go to the object to go and pick it. So there's no way you will not be like using plain stuff to access this. You have to use this method to access the value there. So in the next class, I need to stop here so that this thing is not longer than this and it does not start getting boring. But in the next class now, I'll come back to this my array and start talking about some of these method of array. Or if there's no even time, I can just go directly into this DOM, because all those stuff we still use them later on. So it's something I still have to go back to and explain it better at that point. So I think I will just start with the DOM. Then when we need it, I will now go back to that side. But everything that we've talked about are there, as you can see. Can you see all of them now? They are now being used here. So this document, by now you know that it is object. And here, I told you, anything that have this bracket, this is function. So which means this get element by ID is a function. But we don't call it function directly. We call it method. And why is it method? Is because we are using dots on it. We are accessing this from a particular object. So when a function is coming from objects, that function, we don't call it function again, we call it method. But I will explain it better in the next class. So that is going to be all. Let me stop here and